Speak No Evil is a psychological horror movie that was released in 2022, which is pretty much centered around how listening to your gut but not acting on it because you'd rather be plied can have devastating consequences for not only yourself but the people that you care about most. With a retelling of the movie being released in cinemas this year in English, starring James McAvoy, before going to see it, I thought it would be worth diving back into this movie, refamiliarizing myself with it, and truly understanding the frustration that I felt when I watched it for the first time. With it actually not doing so well at the box office and also being quite divisive in terms of the reception that it got, it's one that provides a lot of talking points and has one key message to take away from it. So let's delve into the movie's terrifying ending and explain all that happens within it. Here is a breakdown of Speak No Evil, the Danish version. So this film thrives on making the viewer feel uncomfortable, whether that be the beautiful landscapes that often get contrasted with the eerie, dissonant music which provides friction amongst two different senses, the constant feeling of dread and panic, and the understanding that there's something up with both Patrick and Karin but neither Bjorn or Louise doing anything about it, or the fact that they just kept going back there despite leaving and being on the homeward stretch. It's only on a rewatch or at the end of the movie where you realise that the film was providing subtle hints throughout the entirety of it that there was always going to be an extremely unhappy ending, and that both Bjorn and Louisa were going to die. For example, when Bjorn and Louisa decided that they were going to stay at the stranger's house that they met on holiday, they both said, "What's the worst that can happen?" During the trip, when Louisa wanted to leave but Bjorn didn't, he said, "There's only a day and a half left. What's the worst that can happen?" And also, when Agnes was in bed with her mother and father, Louise said, "You're with mum and dad now. Nothing's going to happen to you." This all occurring in the first act really did put it in our face that something was going to go terribly wrong for the family. At its core, whilst this film is obviously about making us feel uncomfortable, it also delves into themes around doing the right thing, being plied, and how being the better person can sometimes land you in a world of trouble, even if your gut is telling you to do the complete opposite. Let's first start with Bjorn. Bjorn wasn't what you'd typically describe as a masculine guy. He was actually extremely unhappy with his life, and he was the sole reason as to why they ended up going on the trip. Louise had her apprehensions, even saying that they didn't know them well enough to spend that amount of time with them. But his persistence and the fatigue that he had with the mundane day-to-day is what ultimately got him to persuade her to change her mind. Throughout the movie, we only saw him stand up to Patrick once, and that was when Patrick was yelling at Abel and treating him poorly. Patrick was almost testing Bjorn throughout the entirety of their time together, starting off by being extremely friendly, welcoming and plied, mirroring Bjorn. And then he started uncovering the mask slowly. For example, by making Bjorn pay for the expensive bill at dinner, playing the music really loudly in the car and seeing if he'd stand up for his wife, guilt-tripping him into staying after he tried to leave, and even other things such as watching him and Louise be intimate with one another. On not one occasion as the mask started to slip did Bjorn express his concern or frustration with Patrick, despite the fact that he was extremely uncomfortable. Bjorn didn't like confrontation, and it came across most when they were in the kitchen after he returned to find Ninus. In that moment, Bjorn and his family could have left and made it out alive, but Bjorn was almost like a schoolboy being told off, and he was guilt-tripped into staying. There was a key moment where the family could have gotten away, and that was when they were driving out of there in the early hours of the morning, but Bjorn went back for Ninus, Agnes' stuffed toy that she misplaced, something which we didn't realize would be of great importance when it was misplaced in the opening scene. In the opening section, Patrick said, "That's really heroic, respect," after Bjorn ventured through the city to find the teddy. With Bjorn going back to an environment which was dangerous for his family and putting them back in danger, it provided conflict in the mind of the viewer. Yes, he's going back because he loves his daughter and he wants her to be happy, but at the same time, they were all in a situation where they fled because there was something in their mind which was making them want to leave. So the whole people-pleaser mindset that he has was what landed them in an inescapable hole. Another occasion where this occurred was during the climax of the film, when he found out that Patrick and his wife were essentially kidnapping these children, killing their families, then killing them when they wanted a new one, and Bjorn didn't tell his wife. I get maybe he didn't tell her because he didn't want to panic her, but I feel like she should have known. There was even the opportunity for Bjorn to get away from Patrick towards the end, where Patrick tested him one final time by leaving the keys in the car whilst he went to the toilet. Bjorn could have run him over or simply fled, but he decided not to, not even acting in a moment where death was on the horizon. The simple answer from Patrick when Bjorn said, "Why are you doing this to me?" in saying, "Because you let me." It really did hit home and made you realize that, okay, that was the simple way of putting it. But Bjorn was just too polite and would rather sit in silence and be uncomfortable than upset two people that Louise described in the beginning as strangers, showing that simply biting your tongue and going along with it isn't necessarily always the right thing to do. When looking at Louise, whilst she didn't go along with it as much as Bjorn, she was pretty much cut from the same cloth. For example, she was a vegetarian, but she ate meat in front of them because she thought that it would be rude if she didn't, going against her beliefs. She let them diminish her views on why she only ate fish and let them make her feel bad. She left her daughter with a complete stranger that she didn't know where anything could have happened, and she didn't tell Bjorn about Patrick entering the bathroom and going up to the shower whilst she was in it. They both fell victim to not saying anything, and by just going along with it and not actually leaving, they fell victim to their own kindness, were taken advantage of, lost their child, and they also lost their lives. Bjorn's last words were, "I'm sorry," and they were to Louise, as they were as bare as the day as they were born, meaning that he felt solely responsible for what happened. Did he need to apologize? I don't necessarily think he did, and I think that was included because it showed that even in his dying moments where they'd lost everything and were facing death, he was still being kind. When they were told to take their clothes off, there was no fight back. Bjorn was frozen in the car, and I think he knew what was going to happen because of what he obviously saw in the darkroom where the photos of the many different families were. It was now too late for them to even do anything. That was the most frustrating part about watching that final scene where they were being stoned to death. It was a situation that was extremely unavoidable for them. The both of them didn't want to be at Patrick and Karin's house. They had their suspicions. They both felt extremely uncomfortable throughout the duration of their stay, but they were too polite to do anything about it until it was too late. They let Patrick and Karin dictate their weekend, push their boundaries, and ultimately take their daughter and claim their lives by simply just not leaving when they actually wanted to, and they were guilt-tripped into staying. That final scene of the different families on holiday at the end was one that I thought could be interpreted in a couple of different ways. It kind of insinuated that Patrick and Karin, along with Agnes, were on their way to collect a new child to be part of the family, showing that the cycle would continue again and again. But I think it also showed how valuable life is and how precious one's family can be when you've got it. All of those families were on holiday having fun together, but soon, one was most probably going to end up being destroyed. My review of the movie. When I first watched this film last year, I was a bit disappointed with it. I was disappointed because I thought the decisions that the main characters made were reckless and felt illogical and unrealistic. So I just found it incredibly difficult to believe that the events would unfold. But it's only upon this rewatch where I came to appreciate the message of the film a bit more, and that as a society, sometimes we can tend to bite our tongues and are polite for being polite's sake, when in reality, that is the danger of not speaking your mind or taking yourself out of a situation due to the fear of upsetting somebody. This film was quite creative in the type of shots that it decided to use. For example, I thought when Bjorn was wandering through the city looking for Ninus, there were these shots that were almost like somebody was watching from around the corner, stalking and waiting to pounce, which is exactly what happened. The use of wide shots where the subject just pretty much blended into the environment was also really effectively used, highlighting the sheer amount of space that was around them, and whilst it was beautiful, it also had this drone of underlying danger, because nobody would be there to save you, exactly what we saw in the closing moments of the film. I also thought that the use of sound in one of those shots where both Bjorn and Patrick were at the spot where he eventually went on to kill him and we heard the scream in the distance was something that was so haunting, especially after knowing what goes on to happen. I also thought the use of subtitles was effective. We didn't see the Dutch subtitles at all, but we often saw the Danish. This made us naturally feel how Bjorn and Louise did, not quite being able to understand what was being said between Patrick and Karin, also adding to that element of being uncomfortable. The ending to this movie is something that you don't see coming from a million miles off, and it's most definitely the most memorable thing about this 1 hour and a half story. It's got an ending that's so dark and so powerful to watch. There was this singular note that was droning underneath both Bjorn and Louise getting undressed, and then as they were hit by the first rock, it cut and it went to complete silence, as we could see that Bjorn was screaming in pain, almost reflecting the fact that there was nobody around to hear their suffering. Out of the silence, it was then followed by the haunting piece that played out over the end until the credits. That final scene where they were both killed was constructed in such a haunting and sinister way, where we saw every blow hit them, and all you wanted to do was look away. The performances by the cast were actually really strong. I didn't know any of the 6 actors that fill most of the screen time, but I thought they each delivered their roles really well. Patrick was a character that instantly made you feel uncomfortable, but you could tell would try to lure you into a false sense of security, And Bjorn was somebody that you were just so frustrated with. The first thing we saw Bjorn do was something that he didn't want to do. Give away the chair that his daughter was using, but he'd rather keep this stranger happy than allow his daughter recede. So there was a constant frustration with him, but I suppose, at its core, it showed the true nature of the character. After giving this movie a rewatch, I am really intrigued to see how the 2024 movie is going to unfold, if it's going to be a direct retelling, or if there are going to be some differences. James McAvoy has a solid casting, and I'm looking forward to seeing if the ending's going to be just as powerful as what this one was, and also if it's going to be just as divisive. I'll be releasing a breakdown on the new movie on the day of its release, the 12th of September, so be sure to check it out if you like this one. So, there you have it, a breakdown of Speak No Evil. If you want to see more of your favourite TV shows and movies broken down, then click on the card in the top corner, or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to see what I rated this movie out of 5 stars, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. I'll also be rating the 2024 version of the movie there on the day of release too. What did you think of this film? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.